On paper, the iPhone 13 and 13 mini aren't much to get excited about. Apple's subtle refinements on the iPhone 12 models will be familiar if you've been paying attention to developments in the Android world. Some of the changes are impressive, like bringing the iPhone 12 Pro Max's excellent camera hardware to a smaller phone and a lower price point. Others, like a slightly smaller notch, bigger batteries, faster CPU, and expanded 5G support, feel incremental. Still, they add up to make the iPhone 13 mini and iPhone 13 feel like worthwhile upgrades, especially for those looking to update from older iPhones. If you're coming from an iPhone 12 or 12 mini, you might not notice a huge difference in this year's models. The physical refinements include a smaller notch, a new pink color option, and a rearranged camera module that protrudes slightly further than before. Apple shaved 20% off the front camera's notch, which is nice, but it's still significantly larger than the punch hole designs over in Android land. Given there isn't a fingerprint sensor on the iPhones, a beefier face recognition system is warranted, and I guess we'll just have to put up with a notch until Apple can figure out a better approach. The main way to tell the iPhone 13 and its predecessor apart is by looking at the camera module. Instead of stacking the pair of sensors on top of each other, Apple laid them diagonally. The bump is also a little thicker, and the extra wobbling that this causes is mildly annoying. Otherwise, the iPhone 13 and 13 mini are physically very similar to last year's models. Unlike the iPhone 13 Pros, which got 120Hz screens, the 13 mini and 13 have similar displays to their predecessors. Apple says the panels are 28% brighter. When I set the iPhone 12 and 13 to max brightness and held them up on a cloudy day, I did notice that the newer phone had a teensy bit of an edge. But the difference isn't big enough that you'd know without having them side by side. The thing is, just about everywhere else you look, phone displays are faster. I had been using the Pixel 5 and iPhone 12 before reviewing the iPhone 13, and even Google's 90Hz panels make browsing Twitter and Reddit feel smoother. As someone who's experienced the good stuff, I can tell you that you're missing out. The bulk of the iPhone 13 and 13 minis upgrades are around photography and video. Apple improved both the rear sensors here, and the ultra-wide lens is supposed to let in more light than before. Plus, a lot of the notable additions are contingent on the A15 chipsets, meaning things like cinematic mode won't be brought over to older iPhones. For example, the faster image signal processor, or ISP, means things like nighttime shots won't take as long. I certainly didn't have to hold the iPhone 13 still for as many seconds as the iPhone 12 when I used both of them to shoot a candlelit globe in a super dark room. The difference was probably about 1 second, which sounds insignificant but can feel like forever when you're struggling to remain motionless. The ultra-wide photos I shot with the new phone were actually darker than the iPhone 12's, but they were better exposed. Buildings against the night sky had cleaner lines, less noise, and a more neutral tone than those from the iPhone 12. Google's night sight on the Pixel 5 still offered more details in the shadows though, and I preferred the cooler images it produced. I also used to prefer photos from Pixels because Apple's pictures had a yellowish tinge. But with the iPhone 13s, Apple is introducing a way to better match users' individual preferences called photographic styles. It'll let you choose from one of 5 profiles: standard, rich contrast, vibrant, warm, and cool, which differ in contrast levels and color temperature. You can tweak these levels to your preferences too, and at their original settings, my favorite was vibrant. Unlike filters, this felt more like a set and forget kind of thing that's nice for people like me who've never been into Apple's default treatment. Overall, the iPhone 13 took colorful and crisp shots, though compared to Google's images, they were brighter and had obvious HDR effects. The most intriguing new feature of all the camera updates, though, is cinematic mode. Using its A15 chip's neural engine, the iPhone 13 can create a portrait-like blur effect around subjects it identifies in the scene. You can tap on parts of the viewfinder to change your focal points, or just sit back and let the iPhone decide for you by analyzing who and what's in the scene. On its own, Apple's system is pretty clever. The iPhone 13 did a great job of identifying faces, both human and canine, in my clips, and yellow or white boxes appeared to indicate potential things to focus on. As my subjects turned towards and away from the camera, they became clearer and blurrier, respectively. But when I tried to exert more control and adjust the focal point, the system struggled. Sometimes my intended subject remained blurry even after I tapped on its rectangle. Other times, the iPhone didn't follow the person I selected after they walked behind a pillar or other obstructions, although that's a reasonable situation. When it did perform as expected, cinematic mode produced a pleasant effect that lent my footage a professional air. But at the default intensity, the blurriness looked strange and artificial. The outline of my colleague's head was stark against a softened background, and I had to adjust the f-stop to the highest to get a more natural appearance. It's worth noting that cinematic mode only works in 1080p at 30 frames per second, even if you've bumped your video quality higher. Cinematic mode is also available through the 12 megapixel selfie camera, as well as photographic styles, and both these features were just as effective through the front sensors as the rear. In low light, the iPhone 13 took selfies that were slightly blurry compared to those from the Pixel 5 and Galaxy S21. But when I was well lit, Apple's camera delivered images that were just as sharp as the competition. It even had a more neutral tone than the other two, with more accurate white balance, although Samsung was pretty close. I covered most of the changes coming via iOS 15 when I tested the beta, including things like focus modes and SharePlay. Focus modes, which lets you set custom home pages and notification profiles based on your location or time of day, is still one of the most useful new features on any smartphone platform in recent years. There are some annual updates that we take for granted nowadays, like imperceptibly faster processors and incrementally improved battery life. Though it's not outwardly obvious, Apple says one of the iPhone 13's biggest updates is an internal redesign that let it squeeze in a bigger battery, among other things. Also new in the A15 chip are the GPU, ISP, and video encoder and decoder, which made using the camera super snappy. Oh, and it's also worth pointing out that Apple doubled the storage of the base model of the iPhone 13, so you now get 128 gigs at the entry level. Thank goodness. The main thing holding the iPhone 13 and 13 mini back is their displays. Like I already mentioned, pretty much every other flagship phone has a faster screen now, and even the Pixel 5's 90Hz panel feels noticeably faster. Whenever I reflexively started scrolling my list of Instagram stories viewers or my Twitter timeline or pretty much anything on the internet, it felt like a drag on the new iPhones. I went right back to the Pixel 5 or iPhone 13 Pro whenever I knew I was going to be spending some time scrolling through an article, for example. Despite their brighter screens, Apple said the iPhone 13 and 13 mini should last up to 2.5 and 1.5 hours longer than their predecessors, respectively. While the 13 mini did outlast its predecessor by sticking around almost a whole day on light use, its result of 13 hours and 19 minutes on our video rundown test is still shorter than the average smartphone. It's such a shame. I love the size of the iPhone 13 mini. It's just so much easier to use with one hand. But the greatest drawback of any modern phone this size is a lack of endurance. The iPhone 13, meanwhile, outlasted its predecessor too and generally hung around for almost 2 days. The iPhone 13 and 13 mini feel like they should have been named the 12S and 12S mini thanks to a largely similar look and few major updates. If you have the iPhone 12, you need to decide if the longer battery life and photography updates are worth however much the upgrade will cost you.